Sport and physical expression are inextricably woven into a society's culture. Sport is in and of the culture. It reflects the trends and interests. It can mirror the economic and social standing of different people groups. And sometimes, sport even acts as an agent of change. The brutal social and class conditions of colonial Virginia life were reflected in its favorite pastimes. 18th century Virginia in particular developed a large interest in horse racing. Gerald Gems, former president of the North American Society for Sport History, says upper-class families used it as a way to display wealth and maintain social status.
They would have the biggest carriages, that brought their wives and whoever else they invited to the horse race. And if you had 2 horses, it shows you had some wealth. If you had 6 horses, you had a lot more wealth.
The more extravagant your attire was at a race, the more it signified your wealth. While aristocratic whites enjoyed the opulence offered by horse racing, it was enslaved black Virginians that actually maintained, cared for, and raced the animals.
They were training the horses, they were feeding them, they were caring for them and brushing them and so forth, so they had a lot of knowledge.
That's Linda J. Borish, a professor of history at Western Michigan University.
When the masters would watch the races, often they would bid on some of the slaves who were riding them.
Jim says slaves who served as jockeys were not exempt from punishment if they lost.
So if you lost, you could blame it on your jockey, a slave, punish him if you want. You don't lose any self-esteem in losing to some other guy who you think is lower than you.
Horse racing wasn't the only sport where gambling propped up the exploitation of enslaved people. Cockfighting was a popular gambling event. Enslaved people trained the animals for fights, but the slave owners reaped all of the reward and reputation for any success. Slaves would be further exploited by forcibly competing against one another in contests.
The slaves actually learned to fight, and then they were always involved in other contests where the owners could bet on them, and things like foot races and typical things like that.
It wasn't an exclusively harsh existence. Elliot J. Gorn and Warren Goldstein write in A Brief History of American Sports that the Virginian social structure did occasionally allow black slaves to enjoy their ancestral games along with the new regional pastimes of horse racing, cockfighting, and even fox hunts. Rough-and-tumble wrestling provided a socially acceptable way for poor and rich white men to come together to indulge in violent tendencies. Anybody could challenge anybody for bragging rights. Borish says while it reflected violent parts of society, rural whites used it as an opportunity.
That would be a way for a rural white person to show predominantly his identity, his stand in society, because he didn't have land like the planters. He didn't have great education like many of the planters and none of the formal aspects. But what he did have was the physical tools. And if he was insulted, he's going to wrestle and wear out one of his opponents and try to be the best in that field of competitors.
The patriarchal culture also dictated that women not participate in sport. Their role was to be supportive, sitting on the sidelines, rather than participating in horse races, wrestling, or other forms of exercise.
They were supposed to be more cooperative, so they would be in horseback riding, not horseback races, to be done specifically by women. But that doesn't mean women didn't, push the edge, because some of the women would go horseback riding or in rural areas.
It wasn't until the 1800s that the development in sport technology, team sports, and the alteration of societal norms shaped American sports into its modern form. But the spark of what sports became in America was there from the start. The sports of colonial Virginia reflected its culture, upholding societal constraints and maintaining control for the ruling class. Connor Worley, WHRO News.